Right, so this is a quick video on how to approach the essay in the A-level biology course. This is for the current specification for current year 13, not for anyone who's in year 12 in 2015-16, because your essays will be slightly different. Okay, the first thing you need to think about is how the marks break up. So obviously 16 marks for scientific content. Now you need to be aware that these are awarded in twos, so there are no odd numbers in this, only even numbers, and that to get the final 4 marks, so to take you from 12 up to 14 or 16, you need to include some information that is beyond the specification that's taught to you. So something that's worthy of an A-star mark. So it has to be A-level equivalent knowledge, but come from outside of the current specification. There's 2 ways you can do that. Either read around your subject, look at Biological Science Review articles, look at information in the news, but ensure that it's A-level standard and use that. Or it may be that you would do another subject that possibly has some content that overlaps here that you could include in certain essays, not all essays, but some particular essays, maybe something from sociology or psychology, where you could apply A-level knowledge from another course to this course. As long as it's relevant, that would be fine too. The other places you get in your marks are obviously 3 for breadth of knowledge, 3 for relevance, and 3 for your quality of written communication. Breadth of knowledge just means that you are covering topics from different areas of the course, and we'll have a little look at how you do that. They should be quite straightforward to get. And your 3 relevance marks, again, should be straightforward. What you have to do is keep reading the question and making sure that you are actually answering the question and not answering what you think the question is after you've been writing for half an hour, as it's quite easy to go off topic and end up writing about something you think is relevant but isn't. Written communication is a tricky one here. A lot of people think that because they can spell correctly they ought to be able to get 3 marks. It's not the case. It's the quality of your scientific written communication. So you need to be able to use scientific words in the correct context. For example, if you mean allele, don't say gene. Likewise, if you mean resistance, don't say immunity. Little things like that will catch you out. So it's those words used in the correct context, as well as being able to spell and punctuate and write fluently, that will get you those 3 marks. An awful lot of people don't get 3 marks for that. Okay, so here's my top tips. First of all, plan. There are an awful lot of people who don't do any essay subjects at A-level, mainly science-based, maths-based, and this is the first time you've done an essay in quite some time. And the tendency is to kind of veer away from planning anything. You need to. You absolutely must plan. And also importantly, don't cross out your plan when you've done it. Leave it there. There may be something there that you didn't get a chance to include in your essay that the examiner will look back at and will give you credit for. If you've crossed it out, they will not mark it. If it's there and it's not relevant and it's not right, you won't lose marks, but you might gain a few marks from it. So definitely leave your plan there. I would always suggest starting the essay at the start of the exam. Okay, so although it's the last question, don't do it last. Have a look at it and start to plan out. Maybe plan both of the essays and, cut that half page down the centre and get some ideas about topics that you could include that are relevant to those 2 titles. Sometimes the essay that looks like the better one at first glance tends not to be. So give yourself a chance of having a proper look at both. Don't dismiss one essay immediately. Have a little think, have a little look. What could you include? It's only a few minutes. It's not time wasted. It's time really well spent. So get some ideas of topics that you think are relevant. Make sure you've really correctly interpreted the title, and get some ideas down there. Then you have a choice. Either leave your essay plan and go to the start of the paper and begin at question 1. Make sure you leave yourself enough time at the end to come back to your essay and write the essay later, having planned it at the very, very start. Or if you're one of those people who is good with your time, you know that you can look at your watch and go, okay, I need to stop doing this now and I need to move across to something else. If you can do that and you know that you're not great at the data questions, that you struggle with interpreting those, to give yourself some more confidence, maybe have a go at doing the essay first. At the very, very least, plan it, but maybe also start writing it. Even if you leave it and come back to it, as long as you've given yourself the right amount of time overall, and I would say anywhere between 45 minutes to 1 hour on your essay, and 5 minutes of that needs to be planning time. It sometimes builds your confidence to do the essay and then move on to the data questions. As long as you've given yourself enough time for the data questions, that's fine. At the very, very least though, plan the essay, plan both the essays briefly, make a choice, move on to the data questions, and then work through until you get to the essay again. Your subconscious will have been working on it. It will come up with more topics while you're on the data questions, and by the time you come back to the essay, you'll have more ideas than if you left it all to the end and just don't look at it. So that's definitely something you should need to do. Secondly, it isn't a normal essay, okay? Normal essays have a beginning, a middle and an end. This is not one of those essays. Most biology essays need you to just go straight into the content, straight into one of the topics. The only time where you would maybe be inclined to do an introductory type paragraph would be if there was an essay, say, on membranes, or an essay on enzymes or proteins, in which case the introductory paragraph is going to be telling us about the structures and about how their structures relate to their functions, and then it would actually count as one of your topic paragraphs, and it would feel like an introduction, but it would also have plenty of content in there. You absolutely don't need to conclude your essay at the end. You finish at the end of your last paragraph. There is no need to sum up anything at all. I mean, if you sat there and you're bored at the end of the exam, go back over the data questions. Do not try to write a neat little conclusion for your essay. It's just not necessary. And the third thing is to aim for 5 to 6 paragraphs. Realistically, you're aiming to cover 3 different areas of the biology course by writing your essay. So you should be aiming to get 1 to 2 paragraphs on each of those different areas. So realistically, aim for 6 paragraphs. If you don't get 6, if you only get 5, that's fine, that's not a problem. Your paragraph should be a third to a half a side each. So think about how big your writing is, how many pages that's going to mean you cover. If you've got really, really large writing, then obviously your paragraphs may be just over half a side long. If you've got tiny handwriting or very narrow handwriting, then maybe it will be a third of a paragraph for those. But you will know how you write, you'll know how much a normal paragraph will take, and for you that might be a little bit more or a little bit less than somebody else. Each of your paragraphs is going to be on a separate area of knowledge, and I'm going to show you next how to work your way through using Peel, which may be P or Peel that you may have used in other subjects for essays. Okay, so what I will explain to you now is how to use Peel for each of the paragraphs that you're going to write. So obviously the first letter P is for making a valid point. Obviously, the point you're going to make is going to be one of the topics that you're going to talk about. Hopefully, over the course of the essay, you will have made 5 to 6 valid points that cover enough areas of the course to give you your breadth of knowledge marks, as well as your scientific content marks. Once you've made a point, you then need to explain that point. Your explanation needs to include the relevant, vital scientific content that you've learned at A-level that you should be able to then add after you've made the point. So if you were talking about photosynthesis, obviously photosynthesis would be making the point. The explanation would then talk about the relevant parts of photosynthesis, either the light-dependent or light-independent reaction, any specific information that's going to help you explain how that point is relevant to the title of your essay. Then what you need to do is either give an example, if you think an example would back up your explanation, or you need to give some evidence why this point is important. How you approach this very much depends on the title of your essay and what you're being asked for, but it could be that you've described something happening, you've explained the science behind why it happens, and then you could give an example to prove that it takes place. Or it could be that you need to provide evidence of why this point is so important by saying, if it happens, then the resultant effect would be whatever it is. Or, if it didn't happen, what will be the effect? So making sure that you link in some sort of example or some sort of evidence as to why this point is so important to what you're talking about. The very last thing you need to do in your essay is make a link. Your link needs to relate back to the title, and this is really, really important because it's so easy to go off topic and end up talking about something that you think is answering the title that isn't. We've talked about this before. Best way to do it is to ensure that at the end of every paragraph you link in some of the phrasing from the title of your essay to prove to the examiner and to yourself that you are still talking about the right title. I'll give you an example of that soon. Okay, the best way to show you an example of how somebody needs to continue sticking with the title is to show you an example of how people may not stick with the title but think that they are. There was an essay a few years back about the movement of molecules within cells. And that sounds really nice easy essay. Lots and lots of people chose that one over the other one that year. And lots of them ended up writing about stuff that wasn't going to get them any marks, that wasn't actually valid content for that title. What it wanted was the movement of molecules within cells. So that wouldn't include any movement of molecules into a cell or out of a cell. It doesn't want to know about osmosis, bringing water into a cell. It doesn't want to know about active transport of molecules out of cells or vesicle transport in or out of cells. What it was interested in is the movement of molecules into the mitochondria or out of the nucleus. Things like protein synthesis, how the mRNA, once it's mature, leaves through the nuclear pore, heads out, joins with a ribosome. That kind of movement, the movement of tRNA molecules into the ribosome to deliver the amino acids, and then the amino acids being left there and the tRNA molecules leaving. That's what it wanted, but lots and lots of people ended up writing about movement of molecules into cells and out of cells because they'd forgotten that the key word in that essay title was within. And it's really, really important that you don't do that. So by including the phrasing from the essay title towards the end of every paragraph, you can check that you've made sure that you've stayed on target and you've talked about the right content. Okay, finally what we're going to do is have a look at how you can make sure you can get your breadth of knowledge marks. Usually for each essay, the topics that you could have included, the topics that will end up in the final mark scheme, they'll work out into 3 or 4 possibly, 4 chunks. And you need to make sure that you've covered something from at least 3 different chunks. Now this essay title here about cycles is a nice one to have a look at because it's really, really obvious what the chunks are. If you think about cycles in biology and you had to try and think about different ways that you could approach an essay on cycles, what you will notice is that there are obviously going to be the big environmental cycles. So straight away you're thinking the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, those ones should be really, really obvious. And you can see that they're very similar to each other. They're both in the same big, out there in the big wide world, environmental cycles. Secondly, I'd hope that you realise that there are the really, really tiny scale cellular cycles going on. So you've got Krebs cycle, you've got the Calvin cycle, you've got the cell cycle, for instance, and they're all taking place within cells. Very, very different from the environmental ones, a whole other chunk of cycles that you could talk about. And finally, you've got cycles that we describe as physiological cycles, cycles that take place within the body, but not on a cellular level. So you've got the menstrual cycle, you've got the cardiac cycle, you've got the ventilation cycle. Any of those you could talk about as your third chunk. So hopefully you can see that by talking about maybe 1 or 2 environmental cycles, 1 or 2 cellular cycles, 1 or 2 physiological cycles, you would have 6 different paragraphs, each covering different aspects, and you wouldn't want to be talking about the Krebs cycle and the Calvin cycle and the cell cycle and any other cellular cycles that you could come up with. You wouldn't want to talk about all of them and miss out an environmental cycle, miss out a physiological cycle, because that's going to lose you one of your breadth of knowledge marks. So, good luck with your essay, practice planning, use the mark schemes, check over the content that you need to include, use Peel, try and hit your breadth of knowledge marks, and good luck.